this is the list of David Gray. I don't know if any of you remember seeing this. If you have, again, this is review. Some of you may not have. This is the list of David Gray's sins that he has committed against his children when he was confronted and had counseling. You see the date, May 10th. Some of these sins are redacted because of the heinousness of it. Call crew names, use the belt and a rod, raid too harshly, brutally, too long for too hard, wrong places, legs, head, feet, hands, threatened to get rid of her, to take her away with juvenile jail, to sleep in a garage. This is what he was doing to the children. Disciplined in anger, disciplined in the closet, then left her in there, tied up, locked up. Look at the next sentence. Should have always been adequately dressed in front of her. I hate reading this. Discipline and anger, dragged once to discipline, dragged him. That's his list that he admitted. So when I hear people talk about, well, this is all secondhand information. This is this man's handwriting. This is what he wrote. This is what he confessed in front of the elders, in front of Carrie Harder particularly, who was counseling, I believe. This is Eileen Gray's. Court document and declaration, rather, and she responds to Carrie Hardy's accusations against her. And in this, you'll see the things that she's responding and that she's saying. I'm the petitioner within action. I offer my declaration in lieu of personal testimony pursuant to the section. You see that all right there, right? Number one, she says, the facts herein stated are within my personal knowledge, except for those matters stated on information and belief. As to those, I believe them to be true. And I further affirmatively state that if sworn as a witness, I could and would competently testify thereto. Against our better judgment, respondent, that is her husband, and I, obtained counseling from unlicensed counselor from Grace Community Church named Carrie Hardy. Before Mr. Hardy became a pastor, he was a pharmacist. Respondent David Gray and I had 8 joint counseling sessions with Mr. Carrie Hardy in one short meeting. All 8 counseling sessions were tape recorded with the full knowledge and consent of all parties. In this declaration, Mr. Hardy makes many false statements. He wrongly judges my motives and draws conclusions based on insufficient facts, as well as questionable information that he has received from respondent, who has admitted in writing that he has a problem with lying and slandering me. But Eileen Gray and Julie Roy, they're the one that's making stuff up. This is secondhand information, though, right? Mr. Hardy has repeatedly harassed, slandered, and emotionally abused me. He has also used intimidating, coercion tactics. In his declaration, Mr. Hardy states that he is of the opinion that I separated from my husband because Eileen simply doesn't like David, end quote. Quote, end quote. Mr. Hardy was present when respondent confessed to him and 2 other church elders that he had kicked and hit our daughter on May 10th, 2001. Respondent also confessed to the men the fact that he believed that many of the staff at the church were not actually real Christians, but were fakers, unbelievers. Mr. Hardy was also present during our 8 tape recorded counseling sessions in which respondent confessed to his long-term unaliving talk, abusing our children more than once, his refusal to wear clothing in front of our children, as well as his inappropriate behaviors and chronic lying. The fact is, I separated from respondent over his physical and emotional abuse of our children and his unstable, delusional, and self-harming state of mind. I stated this fact to 2 Grace Church elders, to Carrie Hardy during counseling on September 25th, 2001. Although respondent had also been abusing me, I did not realize the detrimental effect his abuse had upon my health. After we separated, my health improved so dramatically that it became clear to my medical doctor and myself that respondent's abuse of me and our children had resulted in serious physical symptoms, which had led to the decline of my health. Mr. Hardy's statement about my having a tendency to exaggerate is in direct relation to 2 discussions we had during counseling about how rejected I felt by a respondent and how the hurt in my heart was so great. During our recorded counseling session, Carrie Hardy stated that I made the following statement in our previous session. I don't take rejection very well. I take it and internalize it, and it becomes worse, quote unquote. I agreed with this quote Mr. Hardy read to me. My tendency when rejected by a respondent was to also remember the pain of the past rejections, since he was unwilling to apologize for them or admit what he had done was wrong. Respondent had been a threat to the children and to me for 3 years. Mr. Hardy was told of other physically abusive actions respondent had perpetrated upon our children. I now realize that he did not believe me. In his declaration, Mr. Hardy states, quote, David had always seemed to be a fairly laid back and quiet person, end quote. Clearly, Mr. Hardy is unaware of respondent's other life. At home, respondent is neither laid back or quiet, but had often been angry, abusive, and constantly talking with critical and hateful statements about everyone he knew, including Mr. Hardy. I told Mr. Hardy about respondent's chronic physical, verbal, and emotional abuse in respondent's presence on September 25th, 2001. I told Mr. Hardy that respondent had abused his family. Respondent denied nothing, and on occasion said, quote, that was a horrible sin, end quote, during the session. Has Mr. Hardy decided that respondent never actually abused our children? In his declaration, Mr. Hardy makes statements to indicate that he now thinks that respondent did not abuse our children. His terms are, quote, alleged, end quote, alleged failure as a father, quote, end quote, what she claimed had happened, quote, end quote. Has Mr. Hardy forgotten respondent's confession when he admitted that the May 10th, 2001 kicking incident had not been the first time he had abused our children? Respondent said, quote, no, it wasn't the first time. If I gave that impression, I did not mean to, end quote. On October 16, 2001, counseling, respondent confessed to saying and doing everything written in my first order to show cause declaration about the May 10th, 2001 kicking incident. This OSC included verbal and emotional abuse of both blank and I, as well as respondent's self-harm talk. Respondent confessed to repeatedly abusing our children in writing. Respondent handed Mr. Hardy his 4-page handwritten confession entitled My Sins Against Eileen and his resolved list. Respondent told Mr. Hardy that he had made these lists on his own and that he and I had gone over the first list on Sunday, September 30th, 2001. On the first list on page 4, respondent confessed to 16 plus abusive actions he had perpetrated on our children and 37 things he had done to me. Mr. Hardy did not read any of it, but pushed it back across the desk to respondent. This event is documented in the recorded counseling session dated October 2nd, 2001. If Mr. Hardy had read page 4 of this list while respondent listed out his deplorable actions against our children, Mr. Hardy might take a different view of the man he views as laid back and quiet, quote unquote. Just scrolling on to some other examples here. Mr. Hardy claims that I never wanted to reconcile with respondent. That is false. Mr. Hardy told me that I should reconcile with my husband upon his own command and that of the leaders of his church. I have desired to reconcile our marriage, and that is why I entered counseling with him and have repeatedly requested that respondent and I obtain professional marriage counseling. Since he repeatedly refused professional counseling for us and for himself, we remain separated. Respondent refused, stating it would violate my conscience to do it. I cannot do it. My reply was, it did not violate you. It did not violate your conscience to seek help for your marriage. It did not violate your conscience to seek help for your marriage. Based upon that and the fact that respondent has continually threatened me, lied, stalked, falsely accused me, and has demonstrated emotional instability, I have chosen to remain separated and so protect myself and the children from this abusive man. On 2 occasions, Mr. Hardy said to me, "You are irrational." The first time was on September 7th, 2001. Mr. Hardy was telling me to reconcile with respondent against my will. I said to him, I would like you and the elders to prove to me that you trust David with your own children and the children of the people in this church by hiring him back. I also said, when you restore his job, then I will know it's time to consider his return home. Mr. Hardy became noticeably upset and said, you can't expect us to do that. You are irrational. You are making irrational decisions. The second occasion that Mr. Hardy called me irrational was on November 6, 2001. In this recorded session, we discussed respondent's immoral behaviors with our 2 daughters, his delusions, and his chronic lying. We also discussed the fact that respondent did not think that his immoral behaviors were wrong. His conscience was not working properly. Toward the end of the session, Mr. Hardy said, it doesn't matter if he is not entirely repentant. Repeat that again. Mr. Hardy said, it doesn't matter if he is not entirely repentant. Wow. Clearly, Mr. Hardy did not seem concerned for the welfare of our children. When I told Mr. Hardy that I was afraid of respondent and afraid to allow him to live with us because he was still unstable, lying, unable to judge right from wrong in relation to his own actions, and had a long history of violence with his family, Mr. Hardy said, you are irrational, and proceeded to berate me verbally. He told me that he and the elders of the church were now telling me to end restraining orders and reconcile with respondent. On September 25th, 2001, Mr. Hardy told me that I had wrongly separated from my husband. He also said it is not entirely biblical to run from abuse. He was referring to verbal and emotional abuse. Yet I protested and told him, I'm going to protect my children. Not entirely biblical to protect my children. So Bush can protect America, but I can't protect my children. Mr. Hardy was seeking to put a guilt trip on me of his trusting parishioners. During our joint counseling sessions, Mr. Hardy was emotionally abusing me. I kept wondering why the focus during our counseling was on getting me to accept suffering and abuse from respondent. I was being told that respondent would be emotionally abusive again. Yet respondent was not being talked to about why he abuses his family, nor did I ever hear Mr. Hardy tell him to stop doing it. He did not appear to care about respondent's problems. One day, Mr. Hardy said, I don't care about anything more than he won't physically hurt the kids. Past that, I'm not concerned. I did, however, hear Mr. Hardy over and over tell me that I was to submit to my husband even when abusive. Learn to accept his abuse by suffering biblically and denying myself. Mr. Hardy was telling me to accept respondent's abuse and to not let it make me more like Jesus. He said, you are to bear up under emotional abuse as Christ did. When reviled, he reviled not. Mr. Hardy also told me to find joy in the pain, suffer biblically, take pleasure in insults, and to close my eyes to the facts. I told Mr. Hardy that I could choose to accept abuse for myself, but I could not choose it for the children. I love my children, and I would not allow a respondent to abuse them again. I told Mr. Hardy that it is a crime to allow a child to be abused. Mr. Hardy also told me that I had not properly accepted respondent's abuse of me and the children. He said that my health problems were a result of my unbiblical response to suffering. Mr. Hardy told me in the respondent's presence, he won't love you biblically, but you must submit to him. He is a sinner. Let me read this little portion here. Mr. Hardy used cult-like tactics of coercion and intimidation when I withdrew my membership from Grace Community Church. From that point on, Mr. Hardy sent me 5 harassing letters dated 11/27, 101, 21, 02, 3, 13/02, and 8/8/02, in which he ordered me to end the separation from my husband. He also talked to members of his church, who then came to my house and harassed me about leaving Grace Church and about my separation from respondent. Mr. Hardy stated in his first letter, we don't automatically remove someone from membership. For that reason, we are leaving your membership status intact. Does his church operate like a cult? I was being told that I could not withdraw my membership of my own free will. In his letters, Mr. Hardy assumes a position of authority in my life by commanding me to do what he and the church elders say, against my will, and against the law, which states that endangering children is a crime. In his letters, Mr. Hardy makes the following statements, quote, we strongly believe that it is time for you to remove the restraining order and to end the separation from your husband, end quote. Quote, you are making decisions based upon emotions, end quote. Quote, you won't be able to be the kind of wife that pleases the Lord, end quote. In this separation with your family, quote unquote, quote, place personal desires and concerns aside, step out in faith and trust God, end quote. Quote, you have rejected the clear teaching in scripture, end quote. Mr. Hardy threatened me twice in his letters. He was telling me to reconcile or else the church would shame me publicly. Since I would not comply with his demands, I was publicly slandered and shamed on 2 occasions in front of 3,000 or more people during 2 Sunday evening services. As a result of the first shaming, people from the church came to my house and harassed me. Some told me that I should repent of my sin of disobeying the church elders and return to the church. One woman told me to reconcile with respondent at once. I was being told to return the children to their abuser when I knew that he was still unstable. And this woman knew that the respondent had been physically abusing the children. The second public shaming service was preceded by a certified letter which states, we therefore have no option other than to be obedient to our Lord's teaching and remove you from our fellowship. Matthew 18:16. We will announce this to our church body on Sunday, August 18th, 2002. I attended this service for the purpose of video recording it. John MacArthur preached a sermon about God's anger and wrath toward those who sin. He stated my name and said he wanted to publicly shame me. He said I had sinned by separating myself from my husband and was being put out of the church fellowship. This is the court document. The people, State of California versus David Gray. I'm not going to read all of this. I'm just going to read certain sections of it. Defendant David Gray appeals from the judgment following his conviction after jury trial of 4 counts involving SM of his daughter and two counts involving physical abuse of another daughter. Appellant contends on appeal that the trial court erred by failing to sever the trial on the physical abuse counts from the trial on the M charges, and further erred by permitting the prosecution to introduce evidence of a prior uncharged S offense. He further contends that the trial court abused its discretion by restricting the scope of the defense's expert testimony. Finally, he argues that his conviction for committing a forcible lewd act must be reversed because it was a lesser included offense of his conviction for aggravated SA. For the reasons stated below, we are not persuaded by any of appellant's arguments, and accordingly, we affirm the judgment. The information alleged that appellant committed the following 5 offenses, alleged to have been committed between December 22nd, 2000 and December 21st, 2001 against NG. Lewd act upon a child under 14 years of age, counts 1 and 3. Forcible lewd act upon a child under 14 years of age, count 2. Dissuading a witness by force or threat, count 7. An aggravated SA, oral copulation of a child under 14 years of age by a person more than 10 years older, count 9. The information alleged that the appellant committed the following 2 offenses against JG. Forcible lewd act upon a child under 14 years of age committed between September 15, 2000 and July 1st, 2001, count 4. An aggravated SA of a child under 14 years of age by a person more than 10 years older committed between December 22nd, 2000 and December 21st, 2001, count 10. As to counts 1 through 4, it was specially alleged that NG and JG were both under 14 years of age and that appellant engaged in substantial S conduct with each. The information also alleged that appellant committed the following 3 offenses against EG on or about May 10th, 2001, causing and permitting EG under circumstances likely to produce great bodily harm and death to suffer and be inflicted with unjustifiable physical pain and mental suffering, count 5. On or about May 10th, 2001, willfully and unlawfully inflicting cruel and inhuman corporal punishment and injury resulting in a traumatic condition upon a child, and dissuading a witness by force or threat, count 8. Appellant pleaded not guilty and denied the special allegations. The jury returned the following guilty verdicts and special findings, counts 1 through 3 and 9 regarding NG, and counts 5 and 6 regarding EG. The jury found appellant not guilty on both counts of dissuading a witness, counts 7 and 8, and on both counts as to JG, counts 4 and 10. The trial court sentenced appellant to state prison for a determinate midterm of 6 years on count 1, plus a consecutive term of 15 years to life on count 9. The court imposed concurrent terms of 6 years and 4 years on counts 3 and 5. The court ordered terms of 8 years and 4 years on counts 2 and 6, respectively, but stayed those terms pursuant to Section 654. As to count 2, the court stated that if the conviction or sentence on count 9 were reversed, the stay on the 8-year sentence would be lifted, and that term imposed consecutively to all other determinate terms pursuant to the court's discretionary authority. Let's see. On about April 1998, Appellant began to be angry with wife and E.G. on a regular basis. He called E.G. a dog, an animal, and a lemon, and said, "We're getting rid of this animal." He began spanking E.G. angrily and leaving marks on her body. He excluded her from meals and threw away her toys. He told wife she was a horrible mother and was not disciplining the children correctly because they were disobeying him. In November 1998, he tied E.G.'s hands behind her back and put a plate of food on the floor, telling her to eat it, "You dog." Wife testified that over the years, Appellant would lie down on the living room couch or in his bed in his underwear, and he would tell the girls to lie with him. He often had the girls sitting or lying on top of him or giving him a massage. Wife told the girls not to do that anymore. NG would ask wife, "Why does daddy keep calling me to his bed?" Wife urged Appellant to at least wear boxer shorts, but he refused. E.G. once asked wife, "Why is daddy's penis pointy at the end?" Wife confronted Appellant and asked if he had exposed himself to E.G., but he refused to answer. The other two children gave wife some information about what had happened, but none of them had told her the whole story. She knew something horrible had happened. Eventually, in late 2001, wife got the three children together for a tea party when Appellant was away from home. E.G. told wife that Appellant had hit her in the head with a toy rake or shovel. Then he grabbed her and kicked her from the bedroom into the living room. He threw her on the couch, put a sleeping bag over her head, and sat on it while he spanked her. She could not breathe and thought she was going to die. All three children cried and said they thought daddy was trying to kill them and that he would also kill wife. During the sessions, Appellant admitted to physically abusing the children, especially E.G., but said he did not know it was wrong when he was doing it. He also admitted to wife, in writing, that he had not dressed modestly in front of the children, and that he had physically and emotionally abused E.G. and had disciplined the other children in anger. During a monitored visit on February 2003, NG was sitting on Appellant's lap and became very upset, saying he bit her on the ear. After that incident, all of the children seemed to act up a lot more and more aggressively negative toward Appellant. In May 2003, 4 or 5 days after a visit with Appellant, NG was crying and upset for longer than usual for over 2 hours, saying she was afraid of Appellant and saying that he was going to kill her. NG then told wife that quote, "He made me suck on his bottom right here," end quote, and touched her mother's crotch. Wife thought there must be a misunderstanding and said, "What are you talking about? His bottom is back here." NG said, "No, right here, mommy." Her mother asked what she meant, and NG started talking about it. She said his pee-pee was hard like wood, like the ceiling fan. He put it in my mouth. He made me suck on him. I didn't like it. It tasted like a frog that's alive. It tasted like dirty dust. It was yucky. She said, "He's going to kill me because I told you." Previously, NG had frequently said to wife, "I don't like daddy's secrets. I don't trust his secrets." On cross-examination, wife said that NG's first statement to her was, "He made me suck on his pee-pee." NG revealed more the following day, indicating that it had happened more than one time. Wife did not ask NG to describe Appellant's penis, as she was already spouting that out. Wife then called her family law attorney, and eventually a court order evaluation was done. During August 2003, while at the evaluator's office, NG confronted Appellant in front of JG about the essay. A monitor was present, but wife was not. Within a week, JG told wife that he had not been SA'd, that he had also been SA'd. He said, "You know that PP thing that happened to NG? Daddy made me suck on his PP." She did not believe him and asked him if he was just saying that because he heard that happened to NG. And he became upset and argumentative. JG then drew a picture in his pain book and said to her, "Then why did he go potty in my tummy? It made my tummy hurt." Visit with appellant ceased. Wife said that prior to the disclosures of SA, she had wanted the children to see their father. She had been looking forward to appellant having more opportunity to be with the children, and she did not want him out of their lives. Eventually, the police became involved in investigating the matter. Wife recalled telling a detective after she first reported the SA that on 2 occasions when they had lived in LA, she thought she had smelled semen on or near the children. In May or June of 2001, when she was putting bibs on the younger children, she smelled semen and searched NG and JG's heads. After she determined the smell was not coming from the lower part of their bodies, she concluded the smell was coming from NG from somewhere on her person, though she found nothing. Wife testified that the children were homeschooled in Northern California and had previously attended school only at their church. They would not have been exposed to the concepts of oral copulation or EJ. They did not have cable television and mostly watched children's videos. NG testified that when she was 5 years old, appellant made her suck on his penis on 3 occasions. She thought these incidents occurred on 3 consecutive days. The first time, appellant woke her up from her nap by calling her into his bedroom. She went into his bedroom. He pulled down his pants and told her to suck on his potty place. Appellant still had a shirt on and laid down on his back on his bed. NG was on her stomach. She described his potty place as sort of pinkish and hard, and she said appellant was making noises. After what seemed like a long time, appellant pottied in her mouth. It tasted like a live frog and was wet and yucky. Appellant told her to spit it out, and she did so in the bathroom sink. Appellant then said that if NG told anybody, he would choke her, and he put his hands on her neck and choked her a little. NG did not tell anybody what happened because she was scared and thought he would really choke her. Her mother and siblings were not home when this took place. On another occasion, she was in her bedroom and appellant called to her again. She knew what he was going to do, so she hid in her bedroom closet. Appellant found her, picked her up by her arms, and flipped her in the air. He took her into his bedroom, pulled down his pants, and made her suck on his pee-pee place. This time, he laid on his stomach with NG lying on her back underneath him. He squeezed her with his legs and hurt her. She said she could not get away because it was tight where I was. He told her she was doing it wrong and told her to open her mouth wider and wider. Afterwards, appellant put her in the closet. Her mother and siblings were not at home, and she was afraid of appellant and did not tell anyone what happened. On the 3rd occasion, NG was again napping when appellant called her into his bedroom. When she got there, he pulled his pants down and told her to suck on his pee-pee place. She tried to get away, but he put his hand on the back of her head and pushed her head to his potty place. It hurt her, and she felt funny. Again, her mother and siblings were not at home. After appellant was no longer living with the family, and they had moved out of the house where the SA occurred, NG knew she was safe and told her mother and appellant had made her suck on his pee-pee place. NG was 8 years old at the time. NG denied that anyone had told her to say that appellant made her suck on his pee-pee place, and she affirmed that she was telling the truth about what happened. And she was encouraged by Adams, the therapist, to keep journals in which she wrote about her feelings and drew pictures. She had both a happy book and a sad book. In her sad book, she wrote about and drew pictures of her bad dreams and her painful memories. There were numerous references in her sad book to the incidents when appellant hurt her, including when he SA'd her, and also when he choked and dragged her. JG was 7 years old at the time of the trial. He testified that when appellant was living with the family, appellant sometimes hit him on the feet with a belt. His mother also hit him sometimes with her hand and other times with what she called a rod. JG also stated that appellant once dragged him from his bedroom into the living room and forced JG to suck on appellant's PP. JG said that appellant was kneeling and was standing in front of him, and that appellant pushed his head down on his PP. At a prior hearing, JG had said that appellant was standing and JG was kneeling. He described appellant's PP as being soft and said that after a while his father PP'd in his mouth and JG swallowed the pee. And JG swallowed the PP. JG later said that appellant's PP got hard a little bit when the PP came out. Appellant then told JG to rinse his mouth out and sent him back to his room. Back to his bedroom. Appellant told JG, don't tell mommy. JG's mother was not home at the time, but he thought his sisters were in the bedroom. JG also made happy and sad books at the suggestion of Adams, his therapist. No one told him what to draw, but his mother would help him write words in his books. His sad book included drawings dated between August 2003 and May 2004 of his father hitting him and appellant's PP in my tummy. I think we all get the idea here, but all this is hearsay, right? All this is hearsay. The choking and other abuse. I'm taking pauses for obvious reasons, y'all, because this is very disturbing to go through this again. But this is why I'm holding to the position I'm holding to regarding John MacArthur and Phil Johnson. This is from Expository Parenting's post, and actually Phil Johnson is writing and responding to this. He says, many of you have questions regarding the Julie Roy story released this week concerning John MacArthur, as we abide by Proverbs 18:17. You know, the first to present his case seems right till another one comes in question. That's the text. I reached out to Phil Johnson, and he provided the following comments to consider. Note, this is not any form of official statement from GCC. This is Phil Johnson's statement, supposedly, right? I haven't even had a chance to read Mrs. Roy's column yet. She deliberately posted it to coincide with the start of the Shepherd's Conference, which isn't completely over until after church tomorrow. She is writing about a 20-year-old discipline case that I had no involvement in. It doesn't pertain to me in any way, though she always attaches my name to pretty much everything she does. A friend of mine, and listen to this. This is where Han Cho is linked to this. Okay, this is before Han Cho decided to do the investigation. Phil Johnson is referring to Han Cho in this statement. The same attorney and elder that Julie Royce had mentioned in her video is the same elder and attorney that Phil Johnson is mentioning in his statement. Quote, a friend of mine who is both an elder and an attorney with a special interest in defending real victims, notice, real victims, he says, is investigating the case. So by default, he would have to conclude and say, even though he don't want to admit it, because he didn't want to admit to the facts after Hancho came back, the real victim is Eileen Gray and others. A real friend of mine who is both an elder and an attorney with a special interest in defending real victims is investigating the case. I don't know whether the church will make a statement of it or make a statement, and if so, when. But I'm disinclined to think all the noise about it represents a legitimate desire to know the truth because of all the screeching tweets from the survivor, quote unquote, community calling for a halt to the Shepherd's Conference, while someone gives a speedy answer to a piece written by a career muckracker who has proven to be inaccurate and misinformed in the past. If they want GCC to respond, they need to give more objective people an opportunity to investigate the case. This is what Phil Johnson's statement is supposedly. Now, the elder and the attorney is Han Cho. Don't forget that. Do not forget that. Because if that's the case, ladies and gentlemen, if that is the case, that he's referring to Han Cho, then Han Cho did the investigation. Han Cho did the investigation. And in the investigation is what you're about to find. Christianity Today did the report and interview with Han Cho. Grace Community Church rejected elders' calls to do justice in abuse case. While a former leader hopes for change, women who sought refuge in biblical counseling at John MacArthur's church say they feared discipline for seeking safety from their abusive marriages. Last year, Han Cho concluded Grace Community Church had made a mistake. The elders had publicly disciplined a woman for refusing to take back her husband. As it turned out, the woman's fears proved true, and her husband went to prison for CM and abuse. The church never retracted its discipline or apologized in the 20 years since. Can you say unrepentant sin? Can you say unconfessed sin? Can we say that? Notice, as a lawyer and one of 4 officers on the elder board at Grace Community Church, Cho was asked to study the case. He tried to convince the church's leaders to reconsider and at least privately make it right. He said Pastor John MacArthur told him to, quote, forget it, end quote. When Cho continued to call the elders to do justice on the woman's behalf, he said he was asked to walk back his conclusions or resign. It's been 10 months since Cho left Grace Community Church, and he has not been able to forget the woman, Eileen Gray, whose experience was described in detail last March in Julie Roy's news outlet, the Roy's Report. So I guess Julie is lying, Han Cho is lying, CT is lying, everybody's lying, according to what Phil Johnson said, right? They're muckrackers and they're just lying. Though Cho stepped down quietly, he continued to hear from other women from his former church. They had also been doubted, dismissed, and implicitly or explicitly threatened with discipline while seeking refuge from their abusive marriages. Even at his new congregation, Cho began to meet visitors with connections to Gray's case, which he saw as a sign of God's providence. No, he couldn't forget it. The more he learned, the more people he talked with, the more the injustice weighed on his conscience, and the more concerned he grew about the church's biblical counseling around abuse. As Cho wrote in a 20-page memo to top leaders at Grace Community Church last March, quote, I genuinely believe it would be wrong to do nothing. At the end of the day, I know what I know. I cannot unknow it. And I am, in fact, accountable before God for this knowledge. And if you have labored mightily to read this far, you are now accountable before God for it as well, end quote. Grace Community Church is led by MacArthur, one of America's longest standing and most influential pastors. The Sun Valley, California megachurch is best known for MacArthur's preaching and prides itself on its fidelity to the Bible over the whims of the world. Months after raising his concerns about a 20-year-old case, Cho discovered another grievous GCC counseling case in the fall of 2022. A woman reported that church leaders had advised her to move back in with her husband and not get a restraining order, despite his documented grooming behaviors, infidelity, and angry outbursts. Though the case settled in January after the woman sought court order protection last year, 2 pastors had filed declarations on her husband's behalf. In God's providence, he kept placing reminders in front of me. This is Cho's statement. Completely unbidden. When my wife and I were asked by a friend to pray for a woman my wife happened to know, she reached out in concern, and we were horrified to discover the same awful patterns of counseling were still happening at GCC, Cho told CT. This is when I sadly came to believe, beyond any personal doubt, that GCC congregants, who we still love, could effectively be playing Russian roulette if they ever needed counseling at GCC, especially anything involving the care of women or children. I knew I could not pass by silently on the other side of the road, that I needed to help this woman and to call out a warning, or else the blood of the people would be on my head. For this story, Christianity Today spoke with 8 women who recounted how they and others at Grace Community Church had been counseled to avoid reporting their husbands and fathers to authorities, to accept their apologies, and to continue to submit to them. The victims were regularly quoted scriptures on forgiveness, trust, love, and submission, and were told to reconcile and return home, even in cases where they feared for their safety and their children's safety. No one from GCC responded to requests by CT to discuss the church's counseling philosophy or response to abuse or to questions about specific cases. 6 pastors and elders were contacted for comment by phone and email repeatedly over a 3-week period prior to this article's publication, as well as 1 former pastor and elder. Update. Following publication, Grace Community Church released a statement saying that the elders do not comment on counseling and discipline disputes, but that the church deals with accusations personally and privately. End quote. They defended their counselor as biblical. They defended their counseling as counsel, as biblical, saying, quote, "Our church's history and congregation are the testimony," end quote. Cho first read about Eileen Gray's case last March after the Royce Report coverage, when he said he had been asked to look over the church's handling of her case for the elder board. Notice, he was asked to look over the church's handling of her case for the elder board. Upon his review, drawing from his legal background and training, became part of an initial internal investigation. The church discipline happened in 2002, a few years before Cho came to faith at Grace Community Church. Gray had refused to follow leaders' counsel to lift a restraining order against her abusive husband, David Gray. During a monthly communion service, MacArthur characterized her decision as unrepentant sin, saying the mother of 3 chose to leave and forsake her husband. David Gray, once a teacher on staff at the church, went on to be sentenced for his crimes in 2005. Aggravated CM, corporal injury to a child, and CA. Witnesses and victims backed his wife's account of the abusive behavior, while church leaders continued to defend him. According to court documents referenced and posted with the March 2022 Royce Report article, David Gray remains in prison. Cho said many leaders at Grace Community Church refused to read the Royce Report article. Some did and dismissed its findings anyway. Top leaders at the church became defensive, he said, and wanted to protect MacArthur. To Cho, as well as to 7 Christian lawyers who reviewed the material, it was obvious that David Gray was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and Eileen Gray's refusal to lift the restraining order to protect her children was objectively reasonable and fully vindicated. You hear that, Corey? That's vindicated. That's what vindicated and vindication mean, Corey. Now that the facts are indeed known, this is Cho saying this, it is not too late to do justice, even at this late stage, almost 20 years later, he wrote to the elder board. One's own integrity and upholding justice and righteousness and being faithful even in the small things, even for something 20 years ago, all matter immensely. Cho expected the church to hold itself to a higher standard than even the secular courts. In Eileen Gray's case, overseen by then Associate Executive Pastor Kerry Hardy and involving GCC's longtime pastor of counseling, Bill Shannon, he found evidence of mistreatment, bias, and errors in how they handled the case. Eileen Gray was repeatedly disbelieved and accused of being bizarre, which wasn't relevant to the reason for her discipline, and leaders cast doubt on her account despite David Gray's history of deceit. They sided with the CA, who turned out to be a CM, over a mother desperately trying to protect her 3 innocent young children. And that was and is flatly wrong and needs to be made right, Cho said to CT. Numerous elders have admitted in various private conversations that mistakes were made. and that they would make a different decision today knowing what they know now. But those admissions mean you need to make it right with the person you wronged. That is utterly basic Christianity, end quote. While still on the board last March, Cho emphasized the urgency of correcting the record. The elders had called out sin where there was none, he insisted. If they had learned that they disciplined a man wrongly accused of adultery, wouldn't they want to make that right, even if they found out 20 years later? According to Cho, who served as the board secretary and was responsible for taking notes, MacArthur replied during the March meeting that the comparison didn't apply to Eileen Gray. The pastor brought up again claims of her bizarre behavior and wasn't inclined to reconsider her discipline. So for those of you who said that MacArthur didn't know, that MacArthur wasn't aware of all this, here's the evidence right here. Again, after that, Cho said he was told by Elder Board Chair Kris Hamilton that he needed to walk back his findings about the church's mistakes if he wanted to remain an elder. Hamilton did not respond to requests for comment. Cho and his wife resigned their membership the next day. This fall, Cho found himself once again reviewing court filings from a member at Grace Community Church who sought a restraining order against her children in hopes of protecting herself and her young children from abuse. This time, at the woman's request, certain parallels to Eileen Gray were immediately clear to him. The woman told CT she recognized the parallels too. She said when she read about Eileen Gray's last year, she thought, this sounds a lot like what I've been told. CT policy allows victims of abuse to go unnamed for the sake of privacy and safety. Her identity and the details of her account have been verified in reporting this story. Quote, whenever I made moves in the direction of the restraining order, it was be careful of the heart of retaliation, the woman said. They were telling me to back off, essentially. They were saying it was unchristian of me to seek that legal protection because believers don't take other believers to court. Well, that's the problem. They aren't believers. But let me continue. She says she had reported to church leaders evidence of her husband's infidelity, searches for incest, P, inappropriate behavior with their daughter starting when she was just a couple years old. A month after moving back in with her husband at the request of their pastors, she called 911 out of fear of during an argument on the road. In court filings obtained by CT, she stated Pastor and Elder Rodney Anderson told her that she should submit to her husband as unto the Lord rather than provoke him. The DV officers dispatched to the scene, she said, told her not to return home. 2 GCC elders went on to submit sworn statements on behalf of her husband. Anderson's declaration recounts the husband saying during counseling that he and his daughter had touched tongues while they kissed to imitate a scene in a cartoon. A declaration from the other pastor and elder, Brad Klassen, said that the woman came to him concerned about pictures taken by her husband, but that she didn't have evidence of the abuse. According to her own filing, the photos include pictures of her toddler touching her husband's pants zipper and her face being sprayed with water, as well as selfies with the child while she was naked. Klassen's declaration said the photos did not contain nudity. 2 other leaders at Grace said that they would testify on the wife's behalf, but the couple reached an agreement in January prior to their court date, so none of the pastors ended up needing to testify. In the settlement, the wife did not retract the abuse claims made against her husband. In the end, she said, the betrayal of her church, now her former church, hurt the most. I hit sub-zero spiritually. I was doubting if God is real. I thought, if God is real, but we're supposed to submit to church leaders when this is going on, I'd rather die. The woman said to CT, even unbelievers wouldn't stand for this. When she challenged the pastor's advice to return to and trust her husband, she said that she was reminded of passages like love believes all things, and that Jesus said to forgive 70 times, 7 times. According to her account, the trauma and warning signs weren't enough. The pastors wanted evidence of PA. skin-to-skin adultery, or a conviction of CM before agreeing she had biblical grounds for divorce. She couldn't wait for that. The cases at Grace Community Church land in a larger debate around what qualifies as abuse and whether Christians should prioritize reconciliation in abuse cases, with the church and the seminary holding a prominent place among conservative biblical counselors and the Association of Certified Biblical Counselors. Yet, as Cho brought up, let me go ahead, I'm sorry. Like fellow complementarians, MacArthur has preached multiple times against women staying with abusive husbands for the sake of marital submission. He taught that women and children should get to a place of safety and that perpetrators of DV are no longer behaving as believers and have forfeited their right to marriage. Yet, as Cho brought up in his letters to key elders last year, a string of women over the past decade said they received different counsel at his church when they feared for their safety or their children's safety. Multiple women named Bill Shannon, a pastor of counseling at an ACBC fellow, as discouraging them from reporting abuse to police and directing them to stay in homes where they had been threatened with violence. One couple said they observed a counseling session where Shannon failed to advise a member of their family to report a man who had confessed to an incident of CM. Shannon told her to not settle, but did not direct her to leave him since he hadn't been convicted. Shannon is among the leaders who did not respond to multiple requests for comment for this story. Current and former elders had also raised concern about Shannon's incompetent counsel. Cho said MacArthur had been warned about the concerns, but had defended Shannon and kept him in the same position. According to GCC website, Shannon continues to provide formal and informal counseling to members, teach the church's premarital and marriage seminar, and preach sermons for a small adult group. In the first meeting with Bill Shannon, it was made known that my safety was not the number one priority. It was my submission in my marriage, said one woman who asked not to be named in this story because she is attempting to move on from her time at Grace Community Church. My job was not to rile my husband up. While the woman was hospitalized due to her husband's physical abuse, Shannon called her and advised her to go home without calling police. She told CT, at times the torment at home was bad enough that she worried she was going to die, but she said she was told that her situation may be God's will for your life. In marital counseling, pastors have asked wives whether their attitudes contributed to the patterns of violence, anger, and manipulation in their relationships. In some situations, they implied that women were looking for fault in their husbands. It's hard for a pastor to conceive of a dynamic where a woman is receiving mistreatment, where at some point along the road, she is not expressly responsible for it, Holmes said. This mutualization of sin can take place in church settings where both parties are asked to confess and seek forgiveness from each other. Our philosophy is that if there's been abuse, you don't put them into a room and expect them to go through the process of getting the log out of their eyes, said Ken Sandy, a Christian mediator who spoke of patterns he's seen over decades of conciliation ministry, not about GCC in particular. Each of the women CT spoke with said at some point they considered themselves partly responsible for their husband's behavior or had a church leader indicate they were. The women were reminded of the biblical directive for wives to submit to their husbands. For years, they had hoped their submission, their faithfulness in marriage, and their desperate prayers would eventually lead to change in their husbands. But when issues persisted and escalated, they sought help and counsel on what else could be done. It takes a tremendous amount of courage, humility, and vulnerability to even seek help from the church when there has been abuse in the home, said Wendy Gray, who spoke to the Royce Report last year about abuse by her father, Paul Gray, while he was on staff at Grace Community Church in the late 70s. Notice, remember I said decades long? This is not made up. Decades long. Women have hidden persevered, and tried to handle things on their own until there was no other choice, she added. When wives felt like they needed to move out for their safety, they said pastors told them to stay. After they had separated or secured legal protection, they said pastors urged them to reconcile. Women told CT, your pastors saw their husbands' continued involvement in counseling, caring treatment of their kids, and supervised settings and verbal promises that the abuse would stop as indications that they no longer pose a threat. And I'm just getting a text message, somebody talking about this may be biased. And this is why everybody can't do this. If this is biased, I hate to see her be unbiased. That is Julie Royce. In some cases, like those of Eileen Gray and the women who agreed to a settlement last month, leaders at Grace Community Church went on to support the men they had accused of abuse in legal cases. But this is bias, right? Let me read this again. Because I think this needs to be repeated on record again. In some cases, like those of Eileen Gray and the women who agreed to a settlement last month, leaders at Grace Community Church went on to support the men they had accused of abuse in legal cases. Although churches may avoid legal involvement in marital disputes for liability reasons, it's not unheard of to have pastors siding with the accused. Fight ain't for everybody. And it's sad when women defend abusers when they should be standing with women who are being abused. Pete Singer, the executive director of Grace, Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Environment, said seeing faith leaders defend a perpetrator in court was part of what prompted prosecutor Boz Shavizian to start the organization in the first place. I mean, this is pretty long. I'm just going to stop here. If you're doing this for the approval of men or for people to applaud you, just get out of it. Because I don't do what I do for people to agree. I'm reading court documents. I'm reading sworn testimonies. I'm reading statements that have been verified and proof. And yet still people will say that this is bias or that Julie Royce is being biased. I mean, how? I would like to know how. Let's read the letter from John MacArthur to Wendy Gray. We're talking about Eileen Gray, right? Let's look at the letter that John MacArthur wrote to Wendy Gray. His handwriting. August 29th, 1979. Didn't we just read the CT report that said this stuff been going on since the 70s? Did we not read this before? Hello? Did we not see this before? This has been going on since the 70s? This is why I said decades-long abuse. Over 40 years. This is his handwriting, ladies and gentlemen. Dear Wendy, thank you for your letter. I am so sorry about all the problems you have been through, but I believe the Lord is working in very special ways. Your dad is really sad about it all. Sad about what? Your dad is really sad about it all. We have met and talked at length about the situation. He is a wonderful Christian. You hear this? He is a wonderful Christian. And the Lord has worked graciously in his heart so that he is more than ever committed. He is more than ever committed, I believe it says what? To Christ, to his glory. He has been a faithful part of our staff. This is David. This is Paul Gray, Wendy Gray's dad, that John MacArthur is propping up after he has been told that her father has been SAing her. Oh, committed to living. Thanks, Christina. Thank you, sis. Thank you. Committed to living to this day, to his glory. Committed to living to his glory. He has been a faithful part of our staff and will continue to be in the future. We have had good times. We have had good times of, what is this? In the past 2 or 3 days, and I will be close to him in the future, I'm assuming. I'm praying for you, Wendy, and grateful for your love for your dad. Forgiveness is a big, thank you, Christine. Yeah, and he says in prayer, be close to him in prayer. Okay. In times we have had good times of prayer in the past 2 or 3 days, and I'll be close to him. What does that say? What's the last word say? In the future, what does it say? But it says, I'm praying for you, Wendy, and grateful for your love for your dad. Forgiveness is a big word that I know the Lord will be glorified as we work together with your dad to see him be all that God wants him to be. So it is future. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Forgiveness is a big word that comes with a little one, love. So I know the Lord will be glorified as we work together with your dad to see him be all that God wants him to be. I care very much about you and your dad and want you both to know the best of God's blessings and walk in his will. So now, this is what John MacArthur has admitted. He's talked to her father about what he did. And he said John MacArthur said that her father is sad about what has happened. Okay. Well, what was that has happened? Some of you may not know. Some of you need to know, because John Tucker, he responds to it and writes John MacArthur about it. So let's see what he says about it. Summer of 1979. The following is my affidavit for the elders of Grace Brethren Church as to the events leading up to and including my invention with Mr. Paul Gray and Reverend John MacArthur. Summer of 1979. We, my wife and I, were made aware that Paul Gray was making contact with his daughter, Wendy, at their home. At that time, I personally contacted Paul and asked him about these specific charges of SM against his daughter. Mr. Gray's response was complete admission of the SA. Paul asked, I drove, that we drive to Grace Community Church to talk with Reverend John MacArthur. Paul was on staff at Grace Community Church. At that time, Paul, myself, John Tucker, and MacArthur met in Reverend MacArthur's office at Grace Community Church. I explained why I was there and explained the charges I had brought against Paul to Reverend MacArthur. Paul agreed to my charges and confessed to MacArthur of repeated SA involving Wendy at nighttime during normal sleeping hours. By mutual agreement between Reverend MacArthur and myself, it was decided that Reverend John MacArthur would assume the biblical responsibility for counseling, discipline, etc. At that point in time, I felt that God had transferred my biblical responsibility from my shoulders to Reverend John MacArthur and the elders of Grace Community Church. By admitting his sins and crying before God, MacArthur and myself, I assumed that Paul recognized his sins and wanted to do something about it. I was wrong, so wrong. I live with that mistake today. Dear elders of Grace Brethren Church, I know what you face, but a tremendous amount of prayer has gone before you on your behalf. Your responsibility is large as it is. Your responsibility is as large as is the responsibility of a godly church leader. It's a tough decision that you face. God will bless you for your faithfulness. Please call me if I can be of any further assistance. If this subject needs further discussion, please do not hesitate to call me, John Tucker. Wendy's email to Pat Ratisky. Look at the top of the screen. We got your messages. John hasn't been in, so we haven't been able to ask him your question. Tom is meeting with him tomorrow, so I'm sure we can get back to you soon. You are in my prayers, dear girl, Pat. Wendy responds back to Pat in an email dated April 12, 2003. Thank you, Pat. Please tell John that my husband and I were able to meet with blank this week. He was enormously helpful. In my eyes, two separate situations have evolved. Because of John seemingly not understanding the seriousness of the situation both back then and now, especially how he dealt with things this time around, I feel strongly that I can't just put the whole thing behind me anymore and won't until the Lord directs otherwise. Your letter to me, the hurtful one, now makes so much more sense. I'm so sorry for being upset with you. I now see that the reason why John was not worried about potential legal action, unforeseen liability, and the potential and likelihood of more victims surfacing past, present, and future and was not indeed participating in a cover-up, as I originally thought, is because he never took anything serious enough to put the needed time, prayer, and attention into it that it deserved. There is a humongous chance that someday someone from Grace Church's past will come out and tell a story about what my dad did to them when they were young. There is no doubt in anybody's mind who knows about this situation, other than you guys and the elders at Mapton, that this is inevitable. Only then will John see his error. I have thought about writing to the LA Times or doing something with the Lord's guidance to force John to pay attention and to see that what he did was wrong, and to make sure that Grace has steps in place to prevent this from happening again, if it hasn't already. Even 25 years ago, if I had been John's daughter or niece, it wouldn't have mattered if Paul had confessed to 2 nights or 1 night or 1 hour. The mere fact that he was in my room while I was sleeping would have most certainly warranted further investigation. Now that we have uncovered, much to our horror, further victims and younger victims, John had the responsibility to help us get through it and see that things were handled properly this time, since they weren't last. By choosing to call my dad, the perpetrator, the man who forced a 7-year-old to perform OS, just to remind you of the downright seriousness, to help him, John, remember what it was that my dad told him that day in his office was not a wise decision. It just shows that just how little John knows about PD. He had John Tucker's affidavit and could have called him. My dad lied to me for 25 years about what was said that day in John's office. What would lead John to believe that Paul would even know the truth now? We all know that Paul should have been fired and never given a recommendation to return to the ministry. John had a responsibility to protect the youngest sheep in his flock, and he didn't deem it necessary. Is he so far removed from his people that he no longer feels the burden to protect them? I will put prayer into next step to take. A lot of prayer. The Lord has a plan here. I need him to lead. Wendy. And then we have John MacArthur's letter to Wendy, April 18th, 2003. Dear Wendy, we have been receiving your messages at the office, and all of them have been given to me, and I have read them. Even after our conversation, you seem to be unclear about my information regarding your father's relation to you 25 years ago. Since I do want to help you resolve this issue so troubling to you, let me recall and reiterate what I knew. First of all, Grace has always had a zero tolerance standard for any and all moral offenses or compromises by staff members. The church's constitution and practice has always been to discipline church members for unrepentant immorality, and we have done so publicly all through the years according to Scripture. When it comes to staff people, the standard has always been higher. Even if the sinning person repents, they lose immediately their position. This has happened in my knowledge less than 6 times in my 34 years at the church. I think the first occasion was your father. I found out and verified that he had hugged and kissed a single girl who worked in the office. The next day I dismissed him and he was gone. It wasn't adultery, he said, but even the physical contact at the level it was effectively breached our standard, and he was terminated. It was my recommendation to him and to other churches that he not be given any pastoral position, but return to secular work. I have continued to hold that conviction. I had no knowledge of any M as you claim. We know that's a lie. When there was some accusation against him, he told me it was his bitter first wife, and the only thing he ever did was rub his daughter's back while he was going to bed, something any loving father might do. And he said it was completely innocent. Since accusations were only secondhand hearsay to me, and Paul was a trusted person, there was nothing to do but accept his word. As you know, I recently spoke with him by phone to ask if my recollection was accurate. He said it was. He had told me just what I recall and affirmed that it is still the truth, denying your accusations. I'm not sure why all of this has become an obsession for you after so many years, but neither myself nor anyone at Grace can do anything more than encourage you that we conducted ourselves with biblical integrity. Again, the standard is no tolerance for any moral sin among staff demanding immediate termination, as was clearly demonstrated in your father's situation. I'm not sure what more we can do to help you in your struggle, but we are able to pray for you, your family, and your father. Grace to you, John MacArthur, pastor teacher. Well, as he said, there's nothing he can do, right? According to him, he did everything he needed to do. This article here, rallying to protect reputation of abusive church leader, is totally unbiblical. Third, it is absolutely inexcusable and totally unbiblical for church leaders to put the reputation of an abusive leader before the real needs of the victims of that abuser, along with the needs of those who will be abused should that leader stay in position. This is one of the biggest reasons for outrage in the current situation, as well as in similar situations that have been well documented in recent years. It is not simply that a leader sinned, but that other leaders rallied together to protect the reputation of a fallen leader while completely neglecting the lives of those damaged by that leader. Not only so, but by failing to properly discipline a sinning leader, the door was left open for the pattern of abuse to continue. God's people are usually quick to forgive those who fall and show true contrition and repentance, but they have a much harder time forgiving leaders who play political games at the cost of the spiritual well-being of others. Spurgeon, in the letter to his students, in responding to accusations and insults, but particularly in this one, accusations, public accusations, standing as we do in a position which makes us choice targets for the devil and his allies, our best course is to defend our innocence by our silence and leave our reputations with God. Yet there are exceptions to this general rule. When distinct, definite, public charges are made against a man, he is bound to answer them and answer them in the clearest and most open manner. To decline all investigation is in such a case practically to plead guilty, and whatever may be the mode of putting it, the general public ordinarily regard a refusal to reply as a proof of guilt. Under mere worry and annoyance, it is by far the best to be altogether passive, but when the matter assumes more serious proportions and our accuser defies us to a defense, we are bound to meet his charges with honest statements of fact. In every instance, counsel should be sought of the Lord as how to deal with slanderous tongues, and in the issue, innocence will be vindicated and falsehood convicted. End of quote. If there's anything that I've said in this live stream, you want to challenge me on it? If you think that I am attacking John MacArthur, Phil Johnson, Grace Community Church, you thinking that Eileen Gray and these people are lying, or you think that Julie Royce has a sinful axe to grind with John MacArthur and all these other people, and her reporting is a lie, come on to the channel. Let's cam up. Let's schedule a date for us to have a biblical conversation. All we're going to do is go through the receipts, the court documents, the sworn statements, the affidavits, the testimonies. That's what we're going to do. You bring your receipts, I'll bring mine. Email me, SaikoWoods@yahoo.com. There's the email. Yours to accept, yours to reject. Email me, SaikoWoods@yahoo.com, and we can schedule a live conversation about what I have said.
Don't be scared. Don't be scared, and don't laugh either, because it ain't funny.